And honestly, it feels like you're in the room with them while they get into it. You really should hang out with these guys. So, Sleepless, follow the Generation Y podcast, that's WHY, on Amazon Music, or listen early and ad-free by joining Wondery Plus on Apple Podcasts or the Wondery app. Now, are you ready for Halloween treats? Because I think there's someone at the door.
When we got home from trick-or-treating, I noticed a spider crawling across Joseph's mask. My Joey usually freaks out about creepy crawlies, but this time, he was such a big boy. He stayed still while I chased it all over his face. I was the one who lost it when it went scuttling into the eye hole. Oh God, take it off, take it off! But he just kept standing there, staring at me, like nothing was happening. I couldn't take it. I grabbed his mask with both hands and yanked it right off his face. There were thousands of them under there. Spiders, beetles, cockroaches, millipedes, all twisted together, swarming all over my little boy. With both hands, I started sweeping them away, ignoring the stings and bites, sending them this way and that. I was making headway when Joey's costume just dropped to the floor, completely empty. We never found any sign of him.
As the seasons change and the nighttime grows longer, the shadows expand, the darkness grows stronger. The veil which hangs between us and those past fades to reveal the realm they've been cast. Samhain says, others All Hallows Eve. No matter its name, you must dare to believe. For this night of the dead has promises to keep. The promise of horror, of endless no sleep. So now heed the warning, it won't be the last. Brace yourself for the No Sleep Podcast.
Halloween. Such a deliciously dark time of year. I'm so glad you seem to like it because Halloween tends to bug some people. That's what we learned from author Charlie Davenport from the tale which was this episode's cold open, Creepy Crawlies, performed by Nicole Goodnight. We welcome you to our 80s-inspired annual Halloween episode for 2022. And while the theme this season is old-time television, the 80s was the first decade when your TV could be transformed into a movie screen with the help of a VCR and a membership to the local video store. And just imagine the movies you could watch during the month of Halloween in the 80s. The Shining, Nightmare on Elm Street, Poltergeist, the list is almost endless. So why don't you settle into a comfortable seat in the dark, candlelit theater of your mind, as we have many tales which will make All Hallows Eve a sleepless affair. And so, may your Halloween be a treat, may your Samhain be a delight. Halloween is here, so you'll be sleepless tonight. In our first Halloween tale, we meet a woman doing what so many of us do on Halloween, going out looking for mushrooms. Wait, that's not traditional? Ah, well, to each their own. But in this tale, shared with us by author Andrea Pereira, the woman discovers a type of mushroom she's never seen before. And what are the odds that the mushrooms seem to look like jack-o'-lanterns? Performing this tale is Kristen DiMercurio. So, if you'd rather look for a fungi than be a trick-or-treating fun guy, you'd best beware while you're out fall foraging.
I was an amateur mycologist. Okay, very, very amateur. I'd only been out into the woods maybe 2 or 3 times with a guide, but had decided to branch out on my own and see what I could find. So, on a beautiful fall afternoon, I stuffed my backpack with an extra bag, a mushrooming field guide, my knife, and phone. I grabbed an apple off the counter, filled my water bottle, and hopped into the car for the 15-minute drive to the local forest. Ever been to New England in the fall? If you have, you already know what I was looking at. Stunning shades of red, yellow, orange, and brown leaves filled the trees and fell softly to the ground all around me. There was a slight breeze, with just a hint of chill to the air, and warm yellow sunlight filtering through the branches. Paradise, in other words. Today was Halloween, and I hoped that the unseasonably mild weather would last until the morning. I always felt for the kids trick-or-treating with snowsuits on under their costumes. I set off through the massive trunks of old growth, shouldering my pack and scanning the ground for falling rotten logs and protrusions coming from the base of the ancient trees. I was able to fill my bag with a couple of hen and chicken of the woods, beautiful finds that I took photos of to upload to my local foraging club, and continued to move further in and away from the places that were already somewhat familiar to me. Looking up, I noticed through the distance and past the slanted rays of an early setting sun, I saw a tiny mossy clearing with falling logs that looked like the ideal place to find some dangerous trees. Stepping into the circle, I was at first confused, but then entranced as I saw what looked to be tiny jack-o'-lanterns strewn about the forest floor in clusters of 3 or 4. Kneeling, I was shocked to realize they were mushrooms, with bright, fluffy orange caps reaching down in separate lobes almost to the forest floor, giving them a globe-like appearance. On one side of each specimen was what appeared to be a tiny face, and the spaces were filled with a black, tacky-looking substance. To complete the pumpkin appearance, each one had a small green shoot coming from the top center. I dropped my pack, careful to avoid crushing any of these little wonders, and broke out my phone and guide. Snapping photo after photo, I became more and more excited. There was nothing like it at all in the guide. Maybe these were a previously unknown variety. Maybe I could name them. My name would live on forever. Well, at least in the mushrooming community. And getting as many angles as I got, I dropped a GPS pin on the moon and broke out my mushrooming knife. Cutting the stem as gently as I could and being careful not to crush the shape, I tucked the tiny mushroom directly into the stem to avoid contamination with the other species. Looking up, in my excitement, I had spent longer than anticipated on my discovery. The light was getting weaker and weaker, and I decided to finish packing up and head out. Juggling my edible finds along with my pack, I stuffed phone, keys, water bottle, and guide into various pockets to avoid damaging anything, and turned and hiked back the way I had come. Once I reached home, I carried everything into the kitchen and unpacked. I balanced the 3 jack-o'-lantern mushrooms on the counter and took more photos, trying to properly document every inch. Outside my windows, porch lights blinked on in the gloom as the residents of my street prepared for the onslaught of trick-or-treaters. I had been ready to distribute candy with the rest of the neighborhood, decked out in a pointed hat and green wig. But my new find overtook any desire to keep the tradition, so I dumped the candy into a big plastic bowl and propped it on the porch with a "Take one, please" sign taped to the side. Flipping on the outside light on my way back to the kitchen, I bet the teens would have me cleared out before the night had even really begun. Standing over the mushrooms, I picked one up and began to turn it in my hand. I almost dropped it when for a moment I thought the black substance of the face had moved toward my fingers. I figured it must have been a trick of the light, bouncing off the slick surface. I set it down and went about cleaning and sealing up my other bounty in plastic freezer bags. I picked up my phone and uploaded my thumb to the club website when I realized all the photos I was taking were just black squares. Seriously? I swiped over. Photos before this afternoon were fine, but everything after that was blank. Thinking I would just post the location and description and go back for another shot at the area, I opened my map and zoomed out over the forest to the approximate area I had explored. No pin. I knew I had marked it. I had been taught to include coordinates when I made a post, but it simply wasn't there. Turning back to the tiny, smiling faces, I began trying to decide where to put them until I could get some of my club to come look at what I found. I picked them up and placed them on a baking sheet to give a sturdy surface. My fingers must have brushed up too close to the black, gummy eye, and I dropped the one in my hand onto the floor as a sharp pain stabbed into my thumb. Rushing over to look at it in the brighter light of the bathroom, I started in fear as I saw small black dots wriggling into the tip of my thumb. What the hell? Sweat broke out on my forehead. I attempted to grab at them with tweezers and pull them out, but the pain intensified and started to spread down into my hand. Blood welled from the holes I was digging in my attempts at removal. My thumb and part of the palm of my hand began to swell and stretch, with black filaments coursing out underneath the surface of my skin like a spiderweb. I clutched at my wrist and sank down against the side of the shower, my mind chittering in panic. Allergic reaction. This is just an allergic reaction. A sudden knock on the door and calls of trick or treat momentarily broke my focus, and I staggered out of the bathroom, crashing into the end table in an attempt to reach the wall and turn off the porch light. I could hear older kids yell with anger as I flipped the switch. Suddenly, the pain made a massive surge up my arm, and I looked down to see the tiny black lines had become thicker, coursing up to my elbow. I turned my head and retched onto the floor in fear and pain so hard I doubled over. I watched as the threads thickened and grew with lightning speed, continuing up my arm and toward my shoulder. I was sobbing with agony and fear as I tried to calm myself down enough to think straight. I should call for help. I struggled to my knees and looked around for my phone. My head felt fuzzy and light. My arm had swelled in size up to the shoulder, and tiny, orange fungi, coated in blood, sprang through the surface of my skin as I crawled into the kitchen. The tiny pumpkin mushroom lay on its side on the floor, and I could now see a black net of mycelium spreading out from beneath it, tiny orange spores dotting the surface. My phone wasn't anywhere I looked, and I began to wonder why I had needed it. The pain had begun to radiate through my chest and head, the side of my face pulsing and throbbing as bloody tears dripped to the floor. I retched again, and black strings dangled from my mouth, choking me and making me continue to gag. Turning, in one last attempt at help, I managed to get myself upright and lurched towards the front door, bloody footprints trailing behind me as mushrooms sprouted all over my torso, ripping through my clothing and spreading down my legs. The hand and arm that had first been infected were no longer working, instead looking dry and puffy with orange bulbs sprouted over every square inch of skin. I managed to get the front door open, bleeding, black writhing strings hanging from my mouth as families walked by laughing and talking. I took one step and fell forward, tripping over the bowl I had left and sprawling flat onto the ground, my body breaking into bloody hunks of mushroom and skin. Nobody noticed me under the dark overhang of my house, and I was no longer able to scream. As I looked over the remains of my hand, my mind slipped into blackness, and a moan escaped my broken lips, the wind picking up the spores I had become and blowing them away.
Drop the gun! No! She's one of them! She bit me!
He was breaking into my apartment, so I called the police. When the officer came,
Halloween has plenty of old traditions, but as technology advances, there are new traditions starting to take over, like live streaming your Halloween preparations. Everyone wants to see that, right? And in this tale, shared with us by authors Michael and Mariah Fallon, we meet a couple of family vloggers, and they want to show you the best way to get into the Halloween spirit. Performing this tale are Graham Rowett and Sarah Thomas. So log in and join the family fun. That's how you'll learn how to carve a jack-o'-lantern.
Thank you, friend. In apartment 16, there's a safe. The code is 1580.
Welcome to our Halloween episode. Thanks for hanging with the Harpers. I'm flying solo tonight. The kids are already out prowling the neighborhood. Jessica is, I think, a fruit bat, if I'm not mistaken, and Josh is dressed as some character from Japanese anime. They're trick-or-treating with the neighbor kid and his dad, Steve. It's nice to have neighbors you can count on. The kids were complaining that we didn't have a jack-o'-lantern. So I'm gonna kill two birds with one stone and take you step by step through the process. I realize most of you already know how to carve a jack-o'-lantern, but I bet there are some of you who've never done it. Because maybe you're put off by the knives and, you know, the mess. And, hey, don't you have to have some artistic ability? No is the answer to that. Worst jack-o'-lanterns are the ones where some show-off carves out a witch on a broomstick. A howling cat with its tail sticking up. Nice work, Leonardo da Vinci. Real scary. Well, we're live streaming, so it's not too late to decorate your house for the hungry hordes that'll be coming to your door. So, let's get started. Take a look at my pumpkin. It's just about perfect. Not too big, nice shape, good color. No barnacles or growths or other blemishes. Some people like the oddly shaped ones, you know, wide and stumpy or tall and stretched out, but I prefer the traditional shape. Now, I prepare my work area, as I have done here. Clear off a table with a lot of space and spread out newspapers. Use several layers so they can absorb the innards. You don't want to stain the linoleum. I place my pumpkin on the papers. Of course, you'll need some knives. A big one, like this butcher's knife, serrated to make it easier to cut off the top. And something like this paring knife, my favorite, for the fine work. I can't emphasize enough how they have to be sharp, super sharp. If they're not sharp, get a sharpener or buy new ones, but don't use knives with dull blades. You're far more likely to get cut with a dull blade. That goes for cooking too, but that's another stream. Also, you'll need one of these permanent markers. Permanent so it doesn't smear, and a big ruler. I like a big metal one. It's solid, has a nice long handle. Use the marker to draw a circle on top, around the crown. Then draw on the face. You can't go wrong with the basics. Eyes, nose, mouth. Don't worry about making a mistake. You don't have to cut along the lines perfectly, and Comet will take off any residual marker. See, now, look, I made the nose a little too wide. I can correct it in the cutting. And now, we cut. Stick the big knife into the top like this. This is where it's thickest, so you might have to use some force, but if your knife is sharp enough, that shouldn't be a problem. Carefully saw along the outline. This could take some time. You can see I've started already to save time. Now, when you're done, pull off the lid like this by gripping the stem and lift it. If yours is bald, you use the knife or a screwdriver as a lever. As you can see, there will usually be some of the insides hanging off the bottom of the lid. You cut those off with a paring knife or a pair of cooking scissors if you got them. Now, spoon out the guts. I start with the big spoon, but usually end up just tearing them out with my bare hands and slopping them onto the newspapers. You could use rubber gloves if this grosses you out. Now clean out as much as possible. Don't leave any tendrils hanging or clumps of goo, because that can make it harder for the candle to stay lit. You want a nice, clean inner surface. Time to carve my pumpkin's face. Like I said, I prefer to keep it simple. Using the paring knife, I cut out the eyes, just like coring an apple. There you go. Then we make a triangular incision to cut out the nose, like that. See? Easy as pie. But the mouth is where the jack-o'-lantern gets its personality. I like a big old smile. You might want to do an angry or a spooky look or a simple O shape like it's scared. But there's something creepy to me about a gleeful expression, like it knows something you don't. I take my time and carve a big, wide grin from ear to ear, with a few scattered teeth. But just a few. Now we clean up. You wrap the leftover gunk in the newspapers and put it out in the garbage as soon as possible, or before long it'll start to stink. Wash the knives under cold water. Wow, the live stream's getting a ton of hits. Thank you. Time to light her up. Now I'm using a votive candle. It's stable and easy to light. Now lower the candle inside. And pop the lid back on and let's head out to the front porch. Perfect night. Crisp autumn breeze, rustling leaves. I can already see trick-or-treaters across the street. Is that a fruit bat? Ooh, better hurry, they'll be back soon. Position the jack-o'-lantern on the top step, a little to the side. Don't want the tykes tripping over it. And use one of these long utility lighters to light the candle. Make sure it stays lit. Then replace the lid carefully to avoid snuffing out the flame. Let's take a last look at my pumpkin from the front walk, where everybody will first lay eyes on my handiwork. Perfect. And let me tell you, scary. Can't wait for them to see it. Especially good neighbor Steve, who is so helpful. I don't know what we do without him. Uh-oh, I hear giggling voices coming this way. Let's book it. Let the festivities begin. I've got my easy chair, a beverage, a bowl full of candy, mostly peanut butter cups. Now we wait for the arrival of our trick-or-treaters. I love Halloween. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Dan.
And thank you for hanging with the Harpers,
where we show you how, though life may give you scratches and scrapes, family is the best Band-Aid.
Right, kids? Yeah, right. See you next time.
Love you, sweetie pie.
Love you, Pumpkin.
Halloween parties can be a lot of fun, but do you want people coming over to your tiny apartment for a party? Not likely. So in this tale, shared with us by author Alexa Simpkins, a woman reluctantly decides to hold a party at her grandparents' cottage. If only they weren't home at the time, and also rather unwell. Performing this tale are Jessica McAvoy, Wafia White, Katabel Ansari, and Matthew Bradford. So if you're going to throw a party at someone else's home, please be considerate. At least first make sure the hosts aren't sick.
Isla!
Mia's voice yells from the kitchen, overlapping with at least 100 others, all packed into my grandparents' cottage.
Are you going to help me?
Yeah, sorry. I only half mean it. It was her idea to have a Halloween party, and I'm letting her use my grandparents' house to host it. I had even told her that the only reason the cottage is available to use for a party is because my grandparents are ill, and she still insisted. Isn't that enough help? I pushed my way through all of the warm bodies dancing in my way. Among the cast and crew of friends and acquaintances that had decided to come tonight, the least favorite of mine by far were my ex-boyfriend and his new fling. I'm not sure why they even wanted to come. But sure enough, Taylor's smirking face greets me when I get to the kitchen. My best friend stirs punch, and Ben and Taylor take turns picking pieces of apples out of it to snack on. Despite the party being at my house, he ignores my presence completely. She glares at me from behind him. I roll my eyes and look out the window. The moon suffocates behind an overcast of clouds. A cool draft blows in through the window, making me instinctively reach for the jacket on the counter. I realize my mistake. It's Ben's Letterman, which now belongs to Taylor. She giggles. I avoid their stares and continue to look out the window. My face is red hot against the chilly October air, and I can feel Mia's sympathetic gaze on me. 6 months of being broken up. It still feels like it happened yesterday. Cobwebs, string lights, and other decorations adorn the shed. Starting to smile, I say, "Taylor, why don't you run to the shed and grab a blanket for me?" She grins wickedly.
Anything for a friend.
She grabs Ben's hand to lead him out the back door with her. He looks at me with guilty eyes.
Isla.
Don't tell me you've forgotten where they are already. He knows I'm still angry, and I don't feel sympathetic to his guilt. He was guilty when he cheated on me with her, and he is guilty now. The last time he was here, at my grandparents' cottage, he had gotten extra blankets from the shed to lay on the lawn and stargaze. Now the only thing in his gaze is her, and it repulses me. He turns and leaves without another word.
I need more apples.
Mia follows them out. Before I can protest, she's gone. As soon as I step outside, I am immersed in darkness. The only illumination comes from twisting orange and purple lights around the shed. A stillness envelops the grounds, and for a moment, all that exists is the shed and I. I listen and wait. Just as I hear someone go back into the house, presumably Mia and her apples, with the swing of the kitchen door, a piercing scream disrupts the peace outside. Grinning, I walk to the twinkling door. I hear shuffling, crunching, and moaning from behind it. But now, as I take in the scene before me, the screaming isn't coming from the victims. It is coming from me. In the shed stand two small, naked figures hunched over two bodies. My grandparents, wrinkly and ravenous, twist and pull the flesh from the bones of their victims and shove it down their throats. Ben is under the grasp of my grandfather, but to my horror, it was not Taylor sneaking off with my ex-boyfriend, and it is not Taylor who is in my grandmother's arms.
I thought you said
Well, they kind of are.
Okay, I've heard of a flesh-eating disease, but that takes it to a whole new level. That's a kind of sickness I'm not sure anyone can fix. But I do want to talk about problems that can be fixed, and that's why we now have a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. When I was a kid, this time of year presented a very real problem to me. Namely, what am I going to dress up as for Halloween? Think of the conflicts. I could go as Superman if my mom could get me a red cape, or maybe I'd go as the Wolfman if I could find the right mask. Listen, when you're a kid, these are serious problems. As adults, our problems are a little more serious, and we need to take them seriously. Oftentimes, we need to look for outside help to solve our problems. Finding someone who can give you a new perspective on things. I'm not just talking about finding someone who's going to solve your problems for you. I'm talking about someone like a therapist who can help you train your mind so you can become better at solving problems on your own. It can help to speak with someone trained in helping you develop better problem-solving skills. So if you're thinking of giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. For me personally, it was only after I worked with a therapist that I realized how effective it can be to help train my mind to work better at problem solving. And that's why BetterHelp is so good. BetterHelp is online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat-only therapy sessions, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/nosleep. That's betterhelp.com/nosleep. It's all treats with no tricks at BetterHelp. And now, the jack-o'-lanterns await. Let's get back into some biting Halloween horror. For most children, Halloween is a time to put on creepy costumes and collect copious candy. Usually the day after, the spooky stuff fades from their minds. But in this tale, shared with us by author Caitlin C. Baker, we meet a girl who embraces the creepy Halloween spirit year-round. She absolutely loves the darkest night of the year. I joined Tanya Milosevic, Matthew Bradford, and Dan Zapula in performing this tale. So try to take Halloween as seriously as most people do. You'll find it helps if you have to encounter the Shadow Mouth. Eleanor's birthday was on Halloween. As such, it was only natural that she grew up loving the types of things that would make most children refuse to turn off their lights at night. At 4 years old, she had shunned Dr. Seuss in favor of learning her ABCs from the Gashly Crumb Tinies. And on trips to the library, she always sought out the books with the scariest pictures long before she could read them by herself. Every year, when her mother took her to the Halloween store, Eleanor picked out her birthday present, bringing home masks of ghouls and banshees to play dress-up for tea time, and new baby dolls that caused the neighbors to give her curious looks when she carried them around the yard. She loved their eggshell-colored skin, their blue cracked lips, and the black chasms that stood in place of their eyes. Of course, Eleanor always had the scariest Halloween costumes of all her friends, although she always needed to explain them. Last year, she had dressed as Ligeia after she had arisen from her coffin, undead and wrapped in her tattered burial shroud. She'd had to explain this reference to her friend James, who lived next door. A normal 7-year-old boy who had never read any of Poe's classic tales of horror, and who was dressed as a pirate that year. He had listened wide-eyed as she carefully recounted every dreadful detail leading up to the transcendent resurrection of Ligeia's corpse. This terrible retelling had prompted a tense phone call from James' mother the next morning. She was upset as she explained to Eleanor's mother that James had difficulty sleeping the night before and had a nightmare that had caused him to wet the bed and then cry for several hours more. James had later confided to Eleanor that he had dreamed that his body was being devoured by a giant worm as a womanly ghost wrapped in white looked on. Sometimes Eleanor still felt guilty that she had been the cause of such trouble for her friend. Occasionally she noticed the watchful looks that James' mother still gave her to remind her to be careful of the stories she told. This year, Eleanor would outdo herself once again. Halloween Eve was the night that Eleanor and her parents would enliven plain pumpkins into terrible but temporary fiends. At least, Eleanor's jack-o'-lanterns were always scary. While her mother was sketching out some classic jack-o'-lantern features, and her father was already working on carving out a rather soppy-looking smile, Eleanor would not let herself be rushed. She was busy planning out a menacing masterpiece that would strike fear into the hearts of approaching trick-or-treaters when they saw its evil smile aglow and flickering with malice. She carved and filed with near-surgical precision and care, imagining herself as the great artist Frankenstein. With talented hands, she would bring life to inanimate material, to cold guts full of seeds, but without the living spark. At last, her formidable creature stood, framed in fearful symmetry, with 2 glowering and narrowed eyes, 2 small reptilian-like nostrils, and nearly split in half by a wide mouth full of teeth that were long and jagged like broken glass. She imagined that on Halloween night, her little minion would crack open its jigsaw jaws to reveal an impossible void where its squashy innards had once been. If the mean kids from the housing developments came to play their tricks this year, it would gulp them down whole. With one giant serpentine swallow, they would disappear down its invisible gullet into oblivion. Eleanor's monster awaited only the heat of a flickering flame to lodge within its belly to bring it to life and awaken its terror to the world. The next evening saw a quiet birthday celebration at home. James' mother had made some excuse for him this year, and Eleanor did not have many other friends to speak of. But this was no matter. Even after a large slice of cake and a generous scoop of peanut butter ice cream, the real tricks and treats of the evening were yet to come. After dressing in her old-fashioned black lace gown, black bonnet, and black lace veil, Eleanor proudly carried her jack-o'-lantern to its place of honor on the top porch step. She lit the pillar candle inside with a long match before replacing the lid. Eleanor lowered her veil before admiring it, wanting to witness her horrifying creation come to life for the first time through the eyes of a Victorian ghost. She was disappointed to see only unlit blackness. She lifted her veil again, wondering if the fabric had not allowed the nighttime visibility that she had hoped. The problem turned out to be not the veil. Eleanor was puzzled to see that the fiendish features remained unlit. Not merely unlit, but the cavernous hollows in its face were deeply shadowed, like standing in the doorway of a lightless maze or staring down the throat of an animal. The air was brisk with a sturdy breeze that should have challenged even strong flames. Perhaps the candle had been extinguished already, she thought. Eleanor removed the pumpkin lid again to relight the candle, and was astonished to find that it was still lit and did not even flicker in the late October wind, even as the candlelight was undetectable behind the glowering eyes and ghastly grin.
Happy birthday, Eleanor.
Startled, Eleanor quickly clapped the lid back onto her jack-o'-lantern and turned around to see James, who was dressed as Black Panther this year.
Hey! Happy Halloween, James. Cool costume.
Thanks. Yours is cool, too.
James hesitated as he warily considered her eerie appearance.
Who are you supposed to be?
I'm the woman in black. It's from a book my mom read to me. She's the ghost.
It's okay. You don't need to explain. Awesome jack-o'-lantern. Why isn't it lit yet?
Oh, it's too windy. It won't stay lit.
Knowing it was a lie, Eleanor rolled her eyes for the sake of believability, then quickly changed the subject.
Do you want to hit the full-size candy bar neighborhood first?
Yeah, definitely.
Suddenly, they noticed the soft whir of approaching bicycles and looked up. 3 boys rode towards them, in plain black clothes rather than costumes, but wearing masks. A rider in a werewolf mask led the pack. They approached Eleanor's house and made a sudden turn onto her driveway. Instead of slowing down, the boy in front swerved and braked suddenly on the gravel in front of them, spraying little pebbles at Eleanor and James. His 2 goons followed suit. The werewolf got off, dropped his bike in the driveway, and made a beeline for Eleanor. He stopped when he was only a few inches from her face. He was close enough that Eleanor could smell the rubbery odor of the latex mask. The werewolf began to growl, low at first, but gradually escalating. From the other 2 bicycles, a gargoyle and a Frankenstein's monster watched with crossed arms approvingly.
Cut it out, Tommy.
James threw a quick glance at the other boys, who seemed ready to step in at a moment's notice. Eleanor had turned herself into steel and would not let anyone see her intimidated. Eleanor gave the werewolf a sudden shove that nearly knocked him over, and as soon as he recovered his balance, a mockingly amused "ooh" bubbled up from among the 3 trespassers.
Ooh, check out James and his little ghoul friend, all dressed up to come to our neighborhood for the good stuff.
What are you doing here, Baron Buttface?
He tore off his mask and laughed.
Well, we certainly didn't come here for whatever bite-sized nibbles you're handing out this year. We just wanted to see how completely pathetic your Halloween decorations are.
Tommy looked around with critical appraisal, one eyebrow raised.
3 boring jack-o'-lanterns? That's it? And you know you actually have to light them, right? Or couldn't you even afford enough candles this year?
He chuckled again, and the other monsters echoed his laughter.
Real stone gravestones, and a 6-foot werewolf that really howls when people go by.
As soon as Tommy was silent, I noticed another sound punctuating the night. A very low growl, like a distant mockery of Tommy's cruelty. Everyone stopped to listen. Eleanor saw the other kids look over her shoulder at the porch behind her, but Eleanor did not turn around. She was afraid that she already knew the source. Tommy moved closer to scrutinize the corner of the porch where the pumpkin with the shadowed face sat, and the growl became gradually louder as he moved closer to inspect it. Eleanor could almost believe that there really was some terrible beast hiding in the shrub next to the porch, if she didn't already believe the truth to be even more frightful. Suddenly, Tommy broke the tension with another burst of laughter.
It's just a Halloween goof.
He retreated to his bike, mounting it again and pulling his mask back on over his face.
Happy Halloween, losers. Don't let the monsters get you tonight.
Leave your masks on, fart sacks. It's an improvement.
Tommy let out a wild howl as they sped off, and Eleanor and James could hear their last chuckles fade into the distance. Eleanor took James by the hand.
Come on, let's go get some candy.
The two friends returned a few hours later, pillowcases heavy with sweets. Eleanor and James were about to go inside and survey their haul when they saw the last trick-or-treaters of the evening approaching Eleanor's house. Eleanor recognized Oliver, who her mom babysat sometimes, among a group of his friends and chaperoned by parents. Oliver was only 3 and was dressed as Spider-Man. Another little kid was dressed as Scooby-Doo. Another was dressed as a troll doll.
Where are you, Cross?
The 3 of them carried orange plastic pails that rattled modestly with treats. As they turned up the walkway towards Eleanor's house, the parents encouraged the kids to climb up the stairs and grab some candy from the bowl sitting on the top step. However, as the kids got closer, they were surprised when they noticed the quiet, low growl coming from in front of them, and they backed away from the stairs. Scooby-Doo began crying. The troll doll retreated to hug her parents' leg and eyed the jack-o'-lantern uneasily. Oliver's mom reassured him, gently pushing him towards the porch as the boy leaned back against her hands, whining and stomping his feet. Eleanor almost smiled to see her jack-o'-lantern carrying out its intended purpose. After failing to convince the little kids that it was only a Halloween joke, one resigned parent walked up the stairs and grabbed a handful of candy to distribute to the 3 upset toddlers, paying no mind to the mysterious growling that Eleanor could attest was not coming from a sound box. Now, all in tears, the 3 little kids were escorted away by their chaperones. As soon as the last trick-or-treaters were gone, Eleanor and James eagerly climbed the stairs to conduct inventory and make their usual trades before eating themselves sick. Although it did not go unnoticed that, as Eleanor passed, she could feel a heat emanating from her jack-o'-lantern that left her legs warm. Not the heat of a candle, however. It was the moist, living heat of a hungry mouth. Late that night, Eleanor lay restless, too full of candy and dread to fall asleep. As sleep evaded her, she thought of the jack-o'-lantern that she had created, inhabiting the shadows just below her bedroom window and guarding the darkness from mischievous trespassers. She tried to reassure herself that it was just a pumpkin, just a strange pumpkin carved by a strange girl.